Peace, y'all. It is I, the Energy Master, Allah. And if you didn't see the introduction video, make sure you check out the live I did earlier today, entitled Decoding and the Matrix, so you can kind of get introduced to some of the concepts. So if you're already in the know, you know I'm doing kind of like a freestyle set of workshops here through the live, so I can kind of like work out the information, work out the details, and, you know, over time present to you, organized means for you to learn some of these things that I've been putting together for many years, going through several trainings, going through several initiations and things. Let me be a responsible adult and make sure I got my phone on Do Not Disturb while I'm live right here. And we're going to go ahead and get into it. So, the first part of this, where do I begin? Okay, so the Matrix. So you hear it, that word thrown around, you hear, you know, you've seen the movies, different things like this. If you've looked at my stuff, if you've looked at Darius J. Wright's stuff, you're aware of a sort of construct that we're living in. And so, you know, my primary aim, whereas if you want to learn the techniques as it relates to having the outer body experience, is actually exiting the body with the soul so that you can experience the nature of the construct itself and be able to get out of it, go to DariusJWright.com and use his stuff. I'm not here to teach you that. My purpose is to basically examine the nature of the construct from within, such that you can kind of see how the code is ingrained into every facet of our reality, down to every molecule and things of that nature. And so at the end of the Decoding and the Matrix video that I did earlier today, I introduced this concept of, you know, everything being mathematically based. You know, like nobody ever went to war over 1 + 2 = 3, right? So we have to get to that level of understanding of the world around us. Like, I know you're married to your opinions. I know you love trying to be right so somebody else can be wrong, but that is not a functional paradigm, and it is not representative of who we are when we're outside of this. Like, a lot of the ways that we operate, it's only by virtue of the fact that we're operating in a system that was kind of designed by those in power to be kind of a scarcity type of situation where some people will have and some people won't have, and you feeling like you've got to capitalize on things. Like, all of that is just part of a small sliver of what reality can be. And so, as nice as it would be for everybody to just be free and whatever else, freedom also includes you having the right to choose when you want to be free. Because, hey, some people depend on the system. Some people like being part of the system. Some people like not knowing. But chances are, with all the billions of people in the world, if you're watching me right now, you were supposed to be here looking at it. You will be one of, you know, a handful of people who hear this, and then an even smaller fraction of that will get what I'm saying, like, is already prepared and is able to get something new out of what I'm saying. So the way to approach this this information, this workshop, is there's certain things in there that you can try out yourself. I'll go ahead and tell you some of your greatest tools for just about anything I'm going to show you is, one, the calculator on your smartphone. They have a tendency to give you numbers in 12 to 13 digits. That's extremely important and extremely relevant, because you know the relevance of, you know, numbers 12 and 13 in ancient writings and everything from the Bible. Jesus had 12 disciples. You had you have 12 signs of the zodiac, originally 13, and all of this. So I like to think it's not a coincidence that your technology, the tool that you carry right in your pocket, cuts off the digits right then, right there. All right. Second thing, you want to get intimately associated with Wiktionary. So there's a Wiktionary app, WIKTIONARY.com. You get that app because it is not just a dictionary, but it gives pretty good etymology of words. So get in the habit of like actually looking at the roots and seeing the different twists and turns that a word took over time, because the vibration of that word and those sounds, although the end product is sometimes more far removed from the original vibration of it, it still carries that original vibration. And if you know what the original meaning was, it usually gives you insight into that culture's wielding of it with regards to their ability to actually impact their reality with language. Okay, once again, nothing I tell you will be speculation. If it's something that I'm unsure of, just because I haven't gotten all the details or all the information, I will let you know. But if not, then these are things that I've actually tried out, experimented with for quite some time at this point, and have been able to draw something reliable out of it. Now, the reason that Wiktionary is going to be of particular value to you is because we officially live in an era where we talk about like all these different things that they talked about in the ancient teachings and texts and stuff, and this time of great awakening and things of this nature. Everything that I have personally encountered and applied, the common factor here appears to be that, and then why it's like this, it's for you to guess, figure out whatever else. But trust me, this is exactly what I'm seeing right now. It appears that these codes, if you will, were embedded in the reality itself, and I'll tell you how that's even possible in a minute. But it was encoded in the reality itself such that you wouldn't be able to fully put together the pieces until we as humans reached a place in our development where we are able to access all of each other's languages. That's to say, if a code is, if a line of information is encoded such that one of the words is in one language, the next word is in a different language, the next word is in a different language, like languages all over the world, you won't be able to fully decipher the code until you have a platform or you have the technology necessary in order to be able to instantly translate all of those languages and then be able to read that code to see how it fits together. And part of the reason that it works like that is because the vibrations are independent of the culture or the context of the meaning they have around the vibration of the word itself. So that means that naturally, by virtue of the connected language and consciousness field that we all share, the correct vibration may have matched up with the correct word over here in this culture, like as a as a matter of natural selection or whatever other processes it had to go through for that to happen. So what I'm talking about is beyond space and time. It isn't something that's relegated to just a particular period or a particular place. So it doesn't really matter where it pops up and what language it pops up. What matters is the mathematical and geometric arrangement of those vibrations. And so what I'm going to show you does include, like I've, in one of my previous videos, I showed you like how the 1.6180 that starts out the golden ratio, aka phi, it spells Afro. And if that was just a one-off and it didn't appear anywhere else in the digits of that number, if that phenomenon didn't appear at other places, then, that's something that you can just write off as coincidence. But it appears to be a true to form emergent phenomenon, that it isn't just a matter of just finding any old number and wanting to see messages in that number. It's about relationships between numbers that are important to specific structures. Like, let's say there's certain mathematical constants that are common and used for a specific thing in physics. If you see a pattern emerging from all of those, and it's consistent across each of those specific constants that are associated with that thing, and the information you're receiving about it is relevant to whatever that physics concept is, you need to pay attention to it, because it shows that there's something fundamental in not only the structure of the physical reality itself, but within the numbers themselves, as a matter of communicating to you as the human what is pointing toward. And so the esoteric knowledge of the various mystery traditions, magical traditions, religious traditions, all these things that have been around for millennia, it was about making sure that you had the right geometrical understanding of how certain things correspond and connect to each other, such that if you encounter a message that can have a number of meanings because of the way that the word is used or how it's evolved over time, you are able to filter through that and get to the meaning that is most likely associated with that structure. And so that's what I'm going to kind of guide you on. I'm going to show you how this works. I don't even know if there's a name for it, because I've never heard it anywhere, never seen it anywhere. It's just something that I noticed by knowing a thing or two about each of the fields, and then seeing these correspondences here. Okay, so that said, and I don't care how wild the story seems or what process my head went through in order to figure this stuff out. That's not nearly as important as you being able to do the thing, see the thing, and use it for whatever. Like, just hold it on to it, be receptive to it, and then as you encounter other things in your daily walk of life, like, you can either apply it or you can't. If it doesn't work for you, just put it on the shelf, leave it alone. But if there's any percentage of a chance that this can be of value to you and unlock something that's been missing for you, it's worth giving it a listen to. All right, so that said, I have a chart here, and so I'm going to direct your attention to the chart. I'm going to switch the camera around, and I'm going to go through this. And I feel like, at least for the purposes of this video, at least for part one, I think this one little whiteboard will be enough for you to get a stable foundation before we move on to the next thing. All right, so switching the camera. Here we go, baby. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to, you may see this word right here, diatoms. Diatoms. Okay, so if you don't know what a diatom is, okay, so a diatom is this microscopic phytoplankton type of organism that is extremely fascinating because it filters silicon from the water that it lives in, and it shapes it into these beautiful geometric like shaped shells. Like, it's all sorts of types. Like, this is just like three, like, I just drew like three, examples of what these things. There's another one here. So there's different examples of what these things make their shell. So they're essentially making a glass silica shell of these beautiful geometric arrangements that are often in the shape of Platonic solids. So the Platonic solids are this set of 5 key shapes that are credited to Plato for discovering, that pretty much make up the entire structure of nature and the physical reality. Um, you can pretty much say that most of the shapes that you see out here are some variation or combination of those shapes. So then the Platonic solids, you can combine them in different ways or truncate them, which means cut off the corners in different ways in order to make other shapes. But that gets you into stuff like the Archimedean solids and different stuff like that. But for simplicity's sake, you have these 5 main geometric shapes, which also correspond to the 5 classical elements. So you have the tetrahedron, which basically looks like a 4-sided triangle thing, 3D thing. Triangular pyramid is a good way to describe it. And it is associated with the element of fire, which is esoterically linked to will, free will, turning, twisting, friction, that type of stuff. Then you have the octahedron, which is a 8-faced figure. It looks like a kind of like a diamond type of shape or whatever, the octahedron, and it is traditionally associated with the air element. Air is associated with intellect. All right. Then you've got the dodecahedron. So the dodecahedron is a 12-sided figure that is, I've seen it associated with ether, but I've also seen it associated with water, interestingly enough. But we'll just go with ether, and then ether is by extension space. Akash, when you hear about Akashic records, that's what it's talking about. It is metal in Chinese thought, and then what it's talking about is not the material of the metal, but the electrical current and free electron movement, like all of that type of thing, electromagnetic fields, all of that type of stuff is involved with that ether element. Then you have the icosahedron is dual to the dodecahedron. The icosahedron is the reverse, so whereas you have the 12-faced dodecahedron with 20 points on it. Now, with the icosahedron, you have 20 triangular faces and 12 main points. All right. And so that is definitely associated with water in a lot of cases. The water element is associated with the animating principle, is the thing that allows you to move. It is motion. It is all of that and then some. Its transformation is a lot associated with water. Let me see. So we had tetrahedron, we had octahedron, dodecahedron, icosahedron, and the cube, of course. So the cube is the one that you're most familiar with, of course. 6 faces. The cube is associated with the earth element. The earth element is not just associated with the physicality of the body, but also with the nature of something. So something's inherent in nature, its default form, giving form to things or whatever. That's where your cube comes in. Okie dokie. So we got that covered. So diatoms, case in point, these are these living things that build for themselves shells that are made out of these things. Now, this is going to be the wildest stuff you've ever heard. And it's going to it might make you change the way you think of a couple things. Peace, Curtis, I see you. All right. So we have to go back to Africa to tell this story. Okay. So once upon a time, so there's a country called Chad in, it's west to central Africa. You know, there's still, it borders countries like, it's near like Nigeria. It's on that side of things and stuff. It's where the, who lived there? You had like the Dravidians. Once they're said to have lived there and around Egypt and in India and so forth. So there's this connected thing. And so once upon a time, there was this huge super mega lake called Lake Mega Chad is what they call it. And over time, we talking about thousands, maybe millions of years, this thing basically dries up for the most part. There's still a Lake Chad, but for the most part, you've got this big area called the Bodele Depression, where it's just all this sand that's made out of the shells from these little things. So after they've died, they leave behind these geometric shells. and it creates this diatom saying. Now, what is that? Why is that relevant to you? Okay, so let's get into this concept in the Bible where you talk about, breath being sent into the dust to create Adam, right? So the word Adam is Hebrew for earth. There's a pun. It's a pun on words because you see it appear as both Adam, you see it as Adamah, a couple words, one of which means red and the other meaning earth. So this tells you straight up that it is pointing toward a similar tradition to what we find in yoga, in Egypt, all these different places, because the color red is associated with the root chakra, which is associated with the earth element. So the fact that this word shows up meaning both red and earth shows you that we very likely have a connection to the shared tradition here. Okay. So anyways, so these sands, and this blew me away. So first of all, let me tell you about diatoms. So these were the things that were necessary in order to create our atmosphere. So their ability to convert the materials and things that were in the water into the oxygen and various elements that you need in order to live and breathe. These were the things that largely helped create that. They also, to this day, still create about 50, I think it's a little over 50% of the oxygen that we breathe on the planet. So in addition to the rainforest and the trees, you've got these little guys to thank for you being able to breathe and not floating off somewhere. Okay. Important concepts. All right, so these sands from these dead diatoms every year, and this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. There are 2 mountains nearby. This is Africa. So we talk about God breathing air into Adam and da 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 da. Because of the way that these 2 mountains are positioned, every year they basically suck in strong winds between them that then turn around, pick up these diatom sands, and from Africa, they carry these things across the Atlantic Ocean to the Amazon River in South America. It carries them to, it's another river, it might be the Mississippi in the U.S., but it also brings these sands to the Indian River Lagoon, right here in Florida, where I'm at right now, here in my hometown. Peace, Earl. These diatom sands fly all the way from Africa. I think it was something like 70,000 tons of this sand fly across the Atlantic Ocean and deposit themselves in the Indian River Lagoon, a couple other rivers in the States, as well as the Amazon River. Now, the thing that was most striking to me when I first learned that was the very idea that these diatoms from Africa are following the exact path that they brought African slaves. Like the transatlantic slave trade was done along the routes that these diatom sands take to get over here to the States, almost as if to remind us of who we are. It's insane. And so the more I started to look into these things, certain things I started to learn. Okay, so while we're talking about the Bodele Depression, which was the former Lake Mega Chad, let's talk about the name Chad. Okay, so the name Chad comes from the Hebrew letter Zadi, which can be spelled Tchadi or Tz, like this. That letter and that pronunciation is associated with what we eventually pronounce as Chad. Now, what it means is, so how to put this? All right, so there is the letter Zadi, and then you have its equivalent in Arabic. And between the two of those, you basically get this meaning of righteousness on the side of the child, but you also have this meaning of like eternal and this spiritually whole concept. And so this spiritually whole concept is actually what we refer to as the Holy Spirit. Like, I know how it's been described to you, but the word spirit comes from spiritus, which is Greek for breath. It's simply breath. But breath is different from air because it has elements that give life. It creates static electricity through the aerodynamic properties of air moving in and out of out of a system like your lungs. All right. And so this breath of God that we're talking about is very tied to this, because when sandstorms form or when sand is blowing, it does the same thing. Those little particles rub against each other and create static electricity. And we know just about everything in the world runs on electricity. So this is a very important concept that applies to a number of the more remarkable things that you see in ancient texts, and including the Bible. There's a huge difference between what plain old air is doing versus what is essentially a electric system flying through the air in the form of sands and winds. All right. And so there's a type of memory associated with that. And so their main deity in ancient Chad, before certain religions like Islam and Christianity and stuff like that started making their way into West Africa, they called their supreme deity the Eternal One, and that's basically what Chad means. So Chad or El Chad is one of the names, the biblical names of God, meaning the Eternal One. And so it attaches to this concept that's presented by James, brother of Jesus, in his book of the Bible. And you have a lot of people who have presented the idea of the one God as being, oh, my God is the only God and your God is wrong. They've made it any number of things other than what was intended in James, which is the same concept as in India, where you talk about Jiva is Shiva, which is basically just saying that the individual soul and the cosmic soul, which is everything, are basically one and the same. It's just that you apply action, you apply karma to a small portion of it, and it basically works its way through that karma, through those actions, to rejoin with the whole. But it's still the same thing. It's just like you saying, oh, just because I scooped a cup of water out of the ocean, that water is no longer ocean. Like, that's semantics. It's stupid. It has the exact same properties, but there are additional properties that come out when you add that cup of water back to the ocean. That's all it is, and what all the ancient texts were saying. So that's just a little foundation for you before we get into the other stuff. Okay, now you see a couple figures here. All right, so the diatom has, especially this particular species of it, has a very distinct 3-part kind of structure to it, where you've got these two like main poles here, and by virtue of their existence, this third thing, this it's not necessarily connected, but it basically forms a central energy center, if you will. Okay, so this is actually a structure that shows up in a number of like dielectrics and just different electronics and different stuff that rely on having two poles that draw on each other and create a central energy that essentially, that integrated system is what allows energy to move from one end to the other and for it to have biological operations. Okay, so this thing is very similar in structure and function to the Lingam over in India. So a Shiva Lingam, is this structure that a lot of people will just kind of reduce to it being like a representative of a penis or something. And then it sits in a thing called a yoni, which they will just reduce to it just being a vagina. But it's more than that. It's not about the physical, sexual relationship so much as the universal union between the masculine and the feminine forces, which you can look at as push and pull, respectively. Now, the interesting thing about this, so each one of these three parts corresponds to so they have their Trinity in Hinduism, which is you have Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, which, if you want to look at it like an atom, Shiva would be the neutron, Vishnu would be a proton, Brahma would be an electron. Okay, so you just see these trinities throughout nature and reality and everything else. Okay, so the lingam is a unique type of structure because the way that it's made and the materials it's made with is basically charged with sound vibrations in such a way that they maintain their resonance, and it basically imitates the resonance of real living systems like the chakras in your body. So your chakras are basically energy centers in the body that have particular characteristics. They basically, you can look at them as an emergent field of the functions that are related to the organs of that specific area where that chakra is. Now, the interesting thing about comparing this lingam to the diatom is that when chanting Om, so Om over there is a sound, it's considered the primordial sound. Everything is made up of this sound. It's broken up into three parts that correspond to each one of these three. So it's actually three syllables, which are Ah, U, and So Ah is associated with Brahma and corresponds to the solar plexus. So right below the navel here, you got U, which resonates at the heart. So in the center, like in the little space just below where the rib cage meets. And then you have which is in the pit of the throat. Okay, so for you to produce any sound, it has to start up here in the throat. And to do you're sending that ah down here into the solar plexus. As air runs out of the lungs, the mouth naturally tries to close, and as a result, it makes that okay, and so that So if you have properly aligned your body, you're sitting straight, you've been properly trained on how to send this vibration to each one of these parts, you'll notice that vibration goes through the entire body in a evenly distributed way. And this is very important because what that does is it creates a communication link between all the cells of the body, such that they have a uniform expression, if you will, and that uniform expression acts as sort of a subconscious echolocation that lets your mind know, your subconscious mind know everything that is happening in the body. And so your subconscious mind, oftentimes in the form of dreams or during your meditation or whatever kind of ways, through your emotions and senses, it organizes all that information that is taken in, and then it attempts its best to communicate that to your conscious mind. So this is why understanding the various symbols, the different geometries that I was talking about, this is why understanding those various symbols is important, because that's the only way that your subconscious mind has in order to communicate with the conscious mind. So these ancient traditions, the reason they told you these various stories, they always had specific numbers. And I'm talking about the Bible too. There's a reason why you saw specific numbers over and over. These different shapes, these different symbols, is to give you an understanding of these common symbols that pop up. So just like I was saying, how sending that vibration to the such that it comes back up through everything, you see a similar situation happening here with this pole is acting on this one such that a neutral force presents itself in the middle. And so this third energy center only exists by virtue of the interaction between these two. Okay. So over here, I have two cubes, which I will explain in a minute. So I drew them so you can see through them. So you got one cube back here, one cube back here. These points, they intersect when it's drawn this way. And so just think of that as corresponding to these two things here. So we got this little thing swimming around in the water. When it dies, it makes sand with the shells. You got this thing they be making over in India, these large things or not so large statue looking things that actually resonate in a way that's similar to your chakras. And then we've got this thing over here. So before we get over there, you'll notice that there's a shape. Oops, I just erased part of that one. Let me correct that. All right, so you have these shapes that are associated with each of these, and you see some numbers that are written on them. Okay, so the Shiva section of it, it has a circle here, and then by extension you have a cylinder. You have an octagon associated with Vishnu here, and then this 3D octangular prism, if you will. And then right here we have a square, and you have this cubic structure associated with Brahma. So Brahma is considered the architect, the creator aspect. Vishnu is the sustainer. So after you create something, you got to keep it alive and keep it going. There's Vishnu. And then Shiva is known as the destroyer. So once something has run its course, it has to reintegrate with the everything. But Shiva is also associated with resurrection. So that which is destroyed gets repurposed. So similarly to how these diatoms, they went through their life cycle, they died, they leave those shells around. Those shells, they become this sand that flies all the way to the Amazon River, Indian River, all these places, and it nourishes that soil like it's a lot of living things that benefit and utilize what's in these diatom cells, to the point where you even have companies that manufacture, I think they call it diatomic fertilizer or something of that nature. So they utilize this stuff because it has very rich properties to it, and for some reason it seems to be following the same trail that the slave ships followed, as almost as if it's trying to come across here and tell us something. So anyway, so mind you, I told you we start here, we apply that sound to the solar plexus, it moves up through the heart, and it comes back to the pit of the throat. You'll see that we have this circle, which I've made the diameter, so the distance from one side of this circle to the other, we've made that the square root of 2. I'll tell you why in a minute. And then we're applying that here. You see that you also have the square root of 2. That is because if you have a square where the side lengths are 1, so 1, 1, 1, 1, the diameter of one corner to the other of that square will always be the square root of 2. Now, if you watch Terrence Howard's videos, he's got a big problem with the way that the number 1 and the identity property of 1 works. He's got a problem with the square root of 2, because square root of 2, it can do this thing where if you cube that number and then you divide that answer by 2, it gives you the square root of 2 over again. So it creates a kind of loop, is what he said. And so he didn't quite know why it was like that. He just felt something was wrong with it, and he spent so much emphasis and time on it. I was like, let me look into the square root of 2 and let me see what's going on with it. And I discovered something very, very, very interesting, which I'll get into in a minute. So now we've gone from this square root of 2 in the circle is being applied here. In a relationship between a square and a circle, if you did not know, is that they both have 360 degrees. They both have 360 degrees. This one is 360 degrees in the form of curvature, or you could think of it as if I were to cut this thing into 4s, each one of those 4s would be a square corner that is 90 degrees. So that adds up to 360. In this case, the 90-degree corners are on the outside, so those add up to 360. So just from that description alone, you can look at that as being 360 degrees on the inside, 360 degrees on the outside. So you can look at this as like a flower that is blossoming out from that center to now have corners. Though the combination of these two is essential to a lot of the ancient teachings on how things manifest from mental to physical, from quantum vibrations to being physical matter. So that is a concept that has been around for thousands and thousands of years in various traditions, most early in Africa. Okay, so now we have a relationship between the square root of 2 and 1 by virtue of this. Now, that relationship gets expanded upon when we get up here to the octagon. Whereas if the side lengths of an octagon are 1, the distance from the furthest corners horizontally to each other is going to be 1 plus the square root of 2. So now we've evolved this relationship to form the sustainer who is associated with the heart. Okay. So just keep all of that in mind. These things are relevant in a number of ways and a number of different mathematical constants throughout physics that you don't have to necessarily be a physicist to understand, but just know that those numbers, this 1 as a unit, and we all know how 1 behaves. When you multiply something by 1, it's always that number that you multiplied it by. If you multiply 1 by itself, it's still 1. So this is a unique identity property of 1. Square root of 2 is closely related to this 1 as that diagonal of a unit. Okay. All right. So let's come over here. So I told you we've got this structure over here made of 2 cubes that sort of resembles what's happening over here. I mentioned that the cube is associated with the body and the original nature of a person. So you can look at these 2 cubes as representing a physical body and a subtle body, which is basically informing the way that the physical body manifests on this plane. Now, there's an interesting quirk about this shape that I'm showing you right here, because each one of these colors, as I'll go through, is the square root of a number 0 to 6. Okay. So, and then these 7 points, we can apply those to the 7 chakras based on their wavelength and things of that nature. So on this particular model, and then excuse my markers, y'all, I didn't have a yellow marker, so I used the brown one that came with it. So that's why I have this little key here. But if we start with this 1 point right here, this point is 0. Like a point is 0. And so you could look at that as the square root of 0. Okay. This side length, if the lengths of the sides of the cube, just like this one over here, if it's 1, then that means that this line is 1, and that's going to correspond to our indigo. So as far as chakras goes, your violet chakra, it's associated with your crown. The crown is not on the body, but it is the connection between your physical self and your the larger connection to everything, the spiritual self, all of that good stuff. All right. The first chakra that is actually in the body is the third eye, which corresponds to the area in the center of your forehead, the pineal gland, just the center of the head, if you will. It manages the senses for the most part. Okay. The distance from, like we already covered, if this square is 1 by 1 by 1 or whatever, just 1 by 1, then the diameter across these corners is going to be the square root of 2. So already we have the square root of 0, the square root of 1, the square root of 2. Okay. So this automatically being associated with that, so this is our blue. So we had violet, indigo, blue. So this associates the square root of 2 with the throat. All right, that's the throat chakra. So that's very important because the throat is what filters our reality. Based on the way we understand language, it determines how the reality that the third eye perceives through the senses operates, and how that becomes projected onto the reality that you're living in through your connection with the field, the Akashic field of everything around you. So continuing with that pattern, I've gone from a 0-dimensional form to a 1-dimensional form. A line is a 1-dimensional form to this 2-dimensional form as a square or whatever with that square root of 2. All right. So if you notice, we're going up through the dimensions. So each of these colors is associated with a certain dimension of perception in space, as well as one of your chakras. Now, this green is now allowing us to have 3D because it is the length from the corner over here to the far corner in a cube. So on the front face corner this back face corner, this square root of 3 that is represented by the green is allowing us to move from 2D to 3D in the form of a cube. All right. So moving along to yellow, yellow is 2 times the indigo. So now we're talking about the green was associated with the heart. So that brings us back to Vishnu. This yellow is going to be associated with Brahman here. So it's 2 times this side right here. So that's the square root of 4, which we know is 2. So 2 times itself gives you 4. Therefore, the square root of 4 is 2. So we can look at this side as 1. This side is 2. You can see why, because it's 1 length, 2 lengths. Simple as singe. All right. So what that tells you is that solar plexus chakra connects the physical body to the spiritual body. And then this is facilitated by the fact that when we send sound into the solar plexus chakra, it travels through these channels we call nadis. And so these nadis can be seen as vibrational channels through which that sound vibration travels both in and outside of the body. These are well documented. All of these points that it connects to are also called chakras. We deal with the main 7 chakras when we're talking about the major energy centers of the body, but you've got like thousands of these things. And so that is how, instead of having to figure out how to deal with each one individually, you can send sound into the solar plexus and then it distributes that sound evenly out through everything. Okay, so the next one, from the original corner to the farthest 2D corner, by connecting two-dimensional squares, is the square root of 5. This is a very important number because it appears in the golden ratio. The golden ratio is this proportion that shows up in everything. It's used in art. You find it in the medical field. You find it in physics. It's everywhere because it's essentially the function. It is the number function in this construct for growth. How things transform over time from its simplest state to its most chaotic state. So it's an integral part to that particular formula. Now, the final one, we have the red one coming from the original point to the farthest opposite corner in a 3-dimensional 2-cube situation. The red, of course, corresponds to our root chakra. That orange was associated with the sacral chakra. The sacral chakra can be looked at as kind of like the womb. So a lot of our creative force is associated with that. So you could get that connection between that and this idea of it being associated with the golden ratio. But this red is associated with your DNA, your chemical body, your earth connection, the thing that projects you as a physical self. So in other words, these longer ones, the yellow, orange, and red, can be seen as your physical body. And then these 3, the indigo, the blue, and the green, are more your subtle body, spiritual type of body. And then you've got the one point that connects all of them is that 0 field of the violet. And then that's called in some circles your Buddha body. So so a Buddha isn't just one person or just a god or whatever else. You are essentially a Buddha, but you can look at it as the perfect version of yourself that you're trying to get your physical body to be more like. So that's the easy explanation, the short explanation. Okay. If you know anything about esoterica and symbols or whatever else, okay, so I drew the Aleph. So this is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. And it has a value of 1 typically. All right, so the breakdown of an Aleph is that it's understood in Kabbalah that it actually represents the Trinity. It is 3 yods. Yod is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it corresponds to a meaning of I, me, hand, the personal consciousness, the chief, or you can look at a chief as being the appointed commander. So you have a leader and they appoint a commander over a group or tribe, and this is basically what's represented. So this thing here as the Trinity is representative of what's happening over here too. Okay, now if I turn my camera, you start to see that these two cubes look a lot like a Sephiroth tree. So in Kabbalah, you see you have like this tree of life thing, this model that represents the human body with these certain points. So it starts to look very similar to that. And so we've got these sides 1, 1, 1. And so we have a triangle that's made, and then you have a figure, a form that you start to see in there that's very similar to this Aleph. So that makes you think that this center bar is the diagonal associated with the square root of 2. This shape, according to Kabbalic teachings, is said to correspond to the throat and the lungs on the side there. So there is this profound connection between the first 3 points of the Sephiroth tree, pretty much representing knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, that when they come together to one force, it creates the voice. So just like what we had over here with Shiva, where the voice is produced here at the throat and it's sent down and then radiates throughout the body, it appears that your Hebrew letter was exemplifying the same thing. And for whatever reason, these little diatoms that help to make our atmosphere, what you could look at as being made up of breath, because they had to breathe and expire that energy and that oxygen or whatever else in order for it to form around the earth. So there's this profound connection between your throat, your speech, the air that you breathe, and the atmosphere that is allowing life to happen on this planet. All right. So you can look at the atmosphere as being the combination of the breaths of the 8 billion people that are on the planet, as well as the breath of all the other living things contributing to it. So you're connected through this overall network. Okay. So let's talk about a pattern that appears in atoms. So in atoms, each one of the electron shells, you can find the number of electrons in that particular shell through this formula of 2n squared. So in other words, the first shell of an electron, I could plug 1 in for n, and then that'll be 1 squared, which is 1. 1 times 2 equals 2. So there's 2 electrons in the first shell. I could do the same thing with all the rest of them. If the second shell, I plug 2 in for n, 2 squared is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. And so this pattern continues. Well, after Terrence Howell was hooping and hollering about 1 and square root of 2 and all of this, I ended up noticing that this exact same thing can be expressed as n times n plus n. So in other words, if I plug the 1 in there, which gives me 2, I get the same thing over here. 1 plus 1 equals 2 times 1 equals 2. So excuse me, times 1 equals 2. All right. If I write that out, I get 1, 1, 1. So just like my 1, 1, 1 that is associated with this Aleph, I get this here. If that was the only place that happens, that would be one thing. That would be great. But I noticed that this pattern continued for every single one of those numbers. So when I plug in 2, it did the same thing. So 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then that times 2 equals 8. So it follows the exact same structure and pattern of the shells of an electron. So that tells you right off rip that there is one underlying concept, a mathematical concept that is connecting all of these things, all of these traditions right off rip. So when I looked at the value of square root of 2, so this is the throat. So this throat, this whole concept right here is what is giving us an atmosphere, giving us an experience of life. You can go months without food. You can go weeks without water, but you can only go minutes without air. So that tells you how important that factor is to life on this planet. Okay, so the value of the square root of 2 is 1.4142135,624. Once again, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we got 11 digits to work with right here based on my cell phone. Okay, now right off rip, Just like we had the 1.6180, which spells Afro in the golden ratio. Here, the first few letters spell 1.414. This is first letter is A, fourth letter is D. So AD is Adad. So Adad is one of the variations on the spelling of Hadad. We don't pronounce that H because of the language. And Adad is a storm god that is usually equated with like Zeus and folks like that. And he was one of the guys that was worshipped by the Phoenicians. Okay. So if I keep on doing that, I have the letters 2, 1, 3, 5, which could be either B, A, C, and E, or 2, 1 is U, 1, 3 could be M, but we're gonna go with the word us, so UCE. So UCE is a Cyrillic word. So Cyrillic is a very important language and alphabet to know a little something about, because it looks very similar to our English alphabet. It's used in all those countries over there, like Russia, Serbia, all these different countries, but the letters align to different sounds than what we have over here. So in other words, you could easily write a document in Cyrillic. Somebody would think that it's in English language, and it would actually be in Cyrillic and mean something entirely different. So you can trick people in legal documents with this. And so you could imagine that this would have been a very useful tool in the formation of societies and documents and treaties and things of that nature, so somebody could be able to find loopholes and be able to get out of it. All right. So now, so the word us in Cyrillic means to teach, learn. It's a number of things like this. So far we've got this storm god. We've got this concept of teaching. Okay. So what I found is, if I get a number, so this could be translated as either F, B, D, or 24 is also X, so FX. If it's not explicitly giving you a particular word or something like that, I have found that very often you'll see combinations of numbers that appear over and over, and that they tend to deal with a year that is relevant to the whole sentence. So we got this storm god, we've got teaching somebody. And 624, the most significant event that happened in 624 BC is the birth of Thales of Miletus, who was a Phoenician. So we already got that connection. Thales of Miletus is considered one of 7 sages. So we got this concept of the 7, just like we have these 7 chakras. So that's a concept you see pop up in several ancient traditions of 7 sages who taught the world civilization. So all of those myths and whatever else, the 7 sages they're talking about, is usually 6 that went out into the world and 1 that stayed behind. They're talking about those 7 chakras. You got the 6 bodily chakras, and then you've got the 1 that's not attached to the body. Every single time. So it's a very real possibility that the first, the father of Greek philosophy, whatever they say Thales is, he may not have actually been a real person, but a tradition that was handed down to the Greeks. Now, Thales is famous for correctly predicting an eclipse that happened in 585 BC. That eclipse is considered the first event with confirmed date out of all the dates. So anything that happens before 585 is considered mythological or hearsay according to the academic community. Regardless of what they try to say, that is how they're calculating things. As far as they're concerned, nothing can be confirmed before 585 BC. That same year is also considered the first, the beginning of science. So that means that your entire calendar, your entire system is based on this date, this alleged eclipse, this alleged person, Thales of Miletus. Now, Thales gave us some important theorems, including a particular theorem that we'll get into more in the next video regarding how if I have the diameter of a circle, so this is where that circle and square thing comes in, because if this is square root of 2 across and this is square root of 2 across, that means I could draw a circle around this square and they'll basically be the same size. They'll be the same line. So he says that if I have a circle with a particular diameter, if I create a right triangle, the other corner of that right triangle will always be somewhere on this square. No matter where I place that point on that circle, it will form a right triangle of some size, okay? So this shows this connection between these two shapes, these two concepts of the destroyer slash resurrector, as well as the creator, the rebirth. Okay. Now, Thales came up with that theorem. So I look at something like this in the order that is presented, and it looks like it's saying that this storm god taught Thales. Now, I found that this concept of the storm god, and in reviewing the various myths from around the world, is typically talking about, I guess you could say, static electricity, just this relationship, this aerodynamic relationship between electricity and the molecules of air and breathing and things of that nature. So the way that it interacts within your body, as well as the way that it interacts with the sky. Static electricity holds things together. So there's electrostatic at the root of how all the atoms and cells are holding themselves together in your body. And likewise, it is static electricity that is holding the water molecules together in the sky to make clouds. So that concept gives you an idea of what's going on here. Now, Thales of Miletus is interesting because his name, Thales, means to bloom, and to bloom also happens to be the etymology of the word blood. Okay. Now, in the case of Miletus, it deals with the word love, but the root of love actually comes from a word meaning permission. So I would look at something like this. I would say, if static electricity is teaching the blood permission, then it sounds like we're talking about electrostatic permittivity. If this already has something to do with electrostatic, it sounds like we're talking about the physics concept of permittivity as it relates to blood. Thales of Miletus just happens to also be credited with the first one to study static electricity. He was going around, according to the stories, using animal furs to rub against materials like amber in order to produce static electricity. So when we have that kind of thing happen in a fundamental number like this, and we've got multiple examples leading back to the same thing, this is when I decide, okay, well, we've got to investigate this. There's something going on here. So unbeknownst to me, until I saw this, I did not know that there was a concept with blood called dielectric, where when an electric field is introduced to blood, the cells polarize and organize themselves to be able to carry electricity. And what is even more interesting is that each of the different blood types has a different level of dielectric current. So that means depending on your blood type, it carries electricity in a very different way. Now, electricity current is energy. And in thermodynamics, when you're dealing with a closed system, energy is the same thing as information. That is the entropy is basically a measure of this orderly system, the steps that it takes to get to its most chaotic. So over time, it is said in thermodynamics, an orderly system will become more chaotic. And you can apply that to just about anything you could think of. You can look at your body as having started as one organized cell and eventually becoming this chaotic mass of wrinkles and fat and crankiness later on in life, from orderly to cranky. You can look at it in terms of even language, where we had one meaning for things, and then once that Bible got translated all kind of ways, the world became chaotic. So the same concept is underlying all of these things, independent of the things themselves. Okay, and so when you get into these conversations about how an electromagnetic field can be manipulated. These stories about how certain people were created as a result of something having to do with magnetism over in the Nation of Islam, it starts to sound a lot less crazy and like something that's very related to some science that we assume they couldn't have possibly known back then. But yet and still, we have people like the Dogon tribe of Africa who knew about the binary star system of Sirius long before scientists over here in the West had the equipment to be able to confirm that that star existed. So the reason that they were able to know these things, peace, Stephen, I saw you just come in. The reason they were able to know these things is because they understood the underlying structure of this construct that we're living in. Why, you ask? Because we're the ones that made it. In my out of body experience, one of the key things that I was shown was how we built this thing, who built it, what they look like, and how they appear to people based on what their belief systems are, and so on and so forth. So once again, that's not one of those things that I'm able to show you because it was something that I saw, but and I don't know what you're going to see during your experience. There are some consistent things that everybody reports seeing and the way that they experience those things on there, but it is a more valuable conversation to you as somebody who has not experienced those things for me to show you how these things are manifesting themselves in the various structures, whether made by nature or made by man, in this reality, because everything that we're doing is just an emergent property of an underlying system of code similar to what you have in the Matrix, but it's not necessarily a computer program or anything like that. It's just the nature of how the universe itself works. So I think that's enough for now. Go back, review this. If you need to, screenshot this thing and study it on your own time. Study each of the individual parts. But this is the essence of yoga. Yoga means to unite, not just with any old thing, but the union between the individual soul and the cosmic soul, not as two things that are different trying to come together, but two things that are essentially the same thing. And we're just working to remember that truth in the first place. This is not something that is exclusive to a particular culture. It is in everything, including the Bible. Bear in mind that the New Testament in particular was written by the Greeks, and the Greeks were masters at encoding this information. And if they're saying that all of science and all of recorded history is starting from 585 BC, which has another significance that I will share in the next video, then we need to pay attention to that, because our entire reality is being coded based on that particular year, that individual Thales of Miletus, that Phoenician. Remember that our alphabet is based on the phonetic alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet. And then this is no coincidence that these words are showing up in these numbers. That doesn't mean that somebody was trying to be tricky and put them there, but it's very highly likely that the languages themselves, certain words, foundational words, were created based on this fundamental understanding of the connection between the vibration of our throat and the mathematical structure of this construct. I don't know if it works the exact same way in every construct. The only thing I know for sure is that I've seen these types of patterns and things throughout this particular earth realm, and I can pretty much show you the codes of just about anything within this matrix based on this and certain other foundational principles that I will show in the next few videos. But I think that's enough for you to chew on right now. Let me go ahead and get home and then get my daughter ready to go to school tomorrow and stuff. But Diatoms, these are the hint. I can get into Michael Jackson's Remember the Time, like you see those sands in the beginning. There's so many Easter eggs hidden in there that Michael Jackson had to know something. If they killed him off, it had more to do with Universal. Michael Jackson knew something or whatever, but Diatoms, look that up, learn more about the Bodele depression, how those sands travel from Africa to the Americas every single year. Learn more about Diatoms, Shiva Lingam over in India, the chakra systems. Learn more about the Sephiroth tree, Sephiroth tree, and more about this pattern of math that applies to the shells of electrons, how it separates those shells of an electron. And we'll get into it a little bit more next time. All right, so on that note, let you see my face. Peace, y'all. See you in part 2.